Thank you, and I'd like to say good afternoon, and I'm elated to be here to share with you collaborative structures. But before we get started, just wanted to mention that the flare itself comes from a Japanese strategy called the pechakucha, which is just simply where you can use different presentational images with students, and then they speak. So rather than like your typical PowerPoint, where students have a lot of words and phrases, they're using images and pictures, and they're doing just what you just saw the other two presenters do, talk about the images that are being portrayed. So today, in piggybacking on what you just heard Mrs. Lundquist and also Mrs. Freese share with you, I'm going to be talking about collaborative structures. And basically, you can take any content, any skill, any strategy, or a practice in your classroom in what you're wanting your students to do. And by creating a collaborative structure, you're giving them the means to be able to engage effectively, intentionally, and increase your talking time. So as we start, I know that we have all sat in on a professional development or a training in which we've been informed about the difference in what has been called passive learning and active learning. And basically, what the pyramid just shows is that in order for students to actually learn, you have to move them to become more in the active phase. That means they're only getting about 10% of what they're reading, 20% of what they're seeing, 50% of what they see and they read or hear. But when you start to move students into actually talking about with one another, discussing, reflecting, and writing, and doing, that is when that active learning occurs, and you're moving them to about 70 to 90% of your content that they will now remember. So in order for students to learn, they actually need to be able to do something. And so we're going to be addressing today and looking at how we can move from 30 to even 70%. Because if you take into consideration English language learners, research shows that those students need to have as much as 70% talk time and only 30% of teacher time, talk time. So how do we get there? What can we do? What tools can we use in order to move our students to become a more engaged and a collaborative environment? That's where collaborative structures comes in. And collaborative structures, students will be able to not only develop oral language skills, but critical learning in terms of thinking. They will develop self-advocacy. Students can become independent. They will build community, and your classroom can be entirely transformed. And a collaborative structure could be as easy as something that's called like a huddle. Let's say, for example, you're just introducing a new text or a concept or a topic. And so you just want students to brainstorm. It's very similar to when football players huddle together. That's what that is. It's a huddle up, where you can have them huddle up in 3s and 4s or in 5s, and they can share and discuss the information that you're asking them to refer to. Partner that with a think, pair, share, which you're already familiar with, and students now have an opportunity to get a little bit more intimate with the partner, but another structure of that, 2 pairs become a small group. And now you've just got the collaborative structure of sharing out. If you move beyond that, let's say you want them to debate a topic or you want an anticipatory set or a statement, you could engage those students in what is called philosophical chairs. That's simply where the students look at a topic or a proposition and they agree or they disagree. And they basically get to share out their opinions and their ideas. Back it up with a little bit of evidence, and it could easily become a 4-corner discussion or debate. Now students can be moved to look at to what extent do they agree or disagree, and bring in some more of your evidence base behind it. This could be as easily as what we refer to as speed dating, and some of my colleagues like to call it a tea party, just for a more appropriate term. But that's just when you have the students to just line up and face each other. And now they can start to discuss with multiple people in the classroom. You could actually end up with the entire class meeting and greeting and going through a process pretty much in less than like a 30-minute period. So in building community, another collaborative structure where they could do a speed dating or a tea party type environment. If you want something a little bit more formal, this is where the structured academic controversy comes in. This is where you actually use the information to have the students engage in both the pros and the opposition side of an argument. And then they have to switch sides, and they bring in a different piece of text. So now it's backed up with text-based evidence, and students are learning about perspectives, and then they can come to consensus on their own. This is nothing more than a roundtable discussion. And sure, we don't have tables that big, but we could easily take our seats and turn it into like a round table type thing, where students can just informally or just discuss out, kind of like round robining, but bringing in their input and their different ideas. Back that with the numbered heads where they could stand up and deliver out information, and now you've got another structured way for students to be accountable to the learning and to what they are discussing. Lastly, as we go back through and we look, you also have different types of circles, which can bring in the different ideas of carousel brainstorming, and then jigsawing and Socratics, where students are sitting around and they're discussing and talking and bringing in all of the different types of information and the learning that you would like to address and to have them to discuss. So for collaborative structures, you're simply having them to look at a cafe where they're becoming experts in a group and sharing out, just transferring a classroom from being teacher-centered to student-centered, so that they can engage in the types of strategies that were just shared, where now they can present and they have a different way, and it's structured, intentional, and organized way for students to be able to share that information, but not just to increase your student talk time, but also to increase student learning. Students learn when they're able to do, and the way we can encourage them to do is by making sure we don't forget about the collaborative structures we can have in our classrooms. Thank you.